All right, QMJHL fans, welcome back to another edition of our Facebook Live conversations. As you can see by your screen, our special guest today is Jim Hulton from the Charlottetown Islanders. So it's not every day we get a coach, let alone a GM in this league to get to interview. So Jim, welcome, and thanks for taking the time for doing this.
Well, thank you. My pleasure. I look forward to it.
For sure. Now, obviously, we got a different set of questions than the typical ones we have for the boys, because usually we ask them with the number they wear, the reason for it, and all that. But we do ask them if they have a nickname. So I'll start with that one for you. Do you have a nickname?
Well, I'm sure my players call me a lot of things behind my back, but yeah, I'm a guy that's had a lot of nicknames wherever I go. So I grew up, I was Bucky, and then when I went to university, apparently I looked like a. The first day I walked into the dressing room at my university team, two guys called me Bowie, and I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. But apparently, I bore a resemblance to a guy by the name of Jim Buwalda that three or four of the guys had played with, and as those things do, it stuck with me. So anybody from university knows me as one name. Childhood friends know me as another.
So Bowie or Bucky? I would have guessed something along the lines of Jimbo or Halsey or something like
Yeah,
that. But those are random. I think Bowie is actually the Seattle Kraken mascot now, I think.
could be, as I said, and I'm sure I've been called a lot of things over the course of the years coaching by players, but that's all the fun of it.
So we were discussing before going on air here that obviously usually we ask about how the season's going, but being this early in the current campaign, I want to ask. We'll just go briefly over the current team that you have leading into the season. So obviously you guys reached the finals in 2022. Last year was more of a tough year, to get the offense going and all that. You guys have always had strong defensive squads, but I would ask basically to start off, what do you think school will be the biggest reason for the turnaround this year? And going from last in offense, what's gonna change on that end?
Well, the nice part is the special teams have been much improved out of the gate. Now, obviously, a small sample size with only 4 games, but our power play in particular, we've scored a power play goal in each of our games. We just
Yeah.
look a lot more confident and assertive. So that was one of the areas that drastically had to improve when you look at the numbers from last year. And then I just think the core of our team is a year older and a year more experienced. We were pretty young last year. Even a guy like Gio Morno, who held our team in scoring, was a first-year player in the Q, even though he was 19 years old. So all those guys are going to be a year better, and I think it has to be by committee again. I don't think we're going to lead the league in scoring, but hopefully somewhere around the middle of the pack.
Yeah, and obviously, you we mentioned earlier you're head coach, but you're also GM. So you went out and acquired Cole Huckins in the offseason. I mean, was that something to bolster the size, the offense to your team, add some veteran leadership as well?
All of the above. I think the attractive part to Cole, when you look at him, he's coming off the 28-goal season.
Yep.
Played on a team that went to the semis, a real good deep team in Sherbrooke, so he learned how to win. And then the size. I think it's 6'3", 200 pounds, and we were a little bit on the smaller side last year, so I think that, and I think we're getting Cole at the right time. He knows this is his last shot at a pro contract, and he knows. I think he learned to sacrifice and play the right way in Sherbrooke and over the course of his career. So we feel like we're getting at an optimal time.
For sure. And you mentioned the goal scoring that he brings. You also have a decent goal scorer in Michael Hort that was already on board. You brought up Gio Morno earlier. I feel like those guys sort of have like a sleeper reputation around the league where, people don't talk about them that much, but they do put up the points and they show up night in, night out. I mean, what can you say about those two in particular? Like sort of what got them on the map, especially during a difficult offensive season like last year, but they still managed to, make their way up the leaderboard.
Yeah, two different contrasting styles of play. I mean, Michael plays a pro game. He plays a north south. He's a big body, 6'2" kid that plays in straight lines and goes into the dirty areas. He's got a quick release, a heavy shot, and scores goals kind of from different areas. Very good net front in the power play. Where Morno is obviously a smaller stature kid who relies on more speed, skill. Darty player that darts into holes, in and out of opportunities, but equally effective and again off to great starts.
Now, just to briefly cover basically one more player from your team, and then we'll move on from that. But one the name that comes up a lot is Marcus Kiersey. So he's entering a big year. What is sort of the support you give a guy entering one of the draft years and having all that attention?
Well, I think it's important to shut out the outside noise and just focus on being a better player every day. And Marcus got off to a great start. And I think the one thing to caution against, especially the young defensemen, is that they're always going to look for numbers because they know that numbers are important, statistical numbers at the end of the season, but you can't get too wrapped up in it. And Marcus is a pretty good, level-headed kid, and I think he understands the process. He's moving the puck really well this year, skating extremely well. Just, again, a year older, a year more confident, a little bit more stronger. And I think if you just take it gradual and process is an overused word in sports nowadays, but I think what it does is remind you just to get better each day.
Yeah, for sure. It's all about effort and obviously
Yeah.
being well surrounded, and obviously that's something that Charlottetown takes pride in. You have a lot of guys that you've coached and GM'd over the years that went on to make it to the pros. So obviously that whole surrounding environment is also very good up there. Um, Speaking of longevity, obviously you've been around the league now. I think you're entering year 9, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah.
What do you feel like some of the keys to your longevity that says that you've been able to hold your position, especially coming off this summer where we've had such a carousel of coaches? I mean, you've been there forever. You have the respect of your peers and all that. So what's been the key to your longevity?
Well, a lot of good fortune and good people around you. I think it starts with good players. Good players make good coaches, and we've been very fortunate here over the course of 8, now entering 9 seasons, to have a lot of quality, talented players come through the doors. And it's a group effort. It's a team off the ice as well as on the ice. Guy Girard's been my right hand man, associate coach, assistant general manager for 8 of the 9 years. Kevin Henderson's now entering year number 4. So we've got a cohesive staff that does a lot together. Our equipment staff. Spider McNeil is a day 1 employee of the franchise. So I think everybody pitches in. Our scouting staff's been together for quite a while too. Trevor Burt is our director of player personnel. So I'm not a guy that likes to micromanage. I believe in surrounding yourself with good people and let them do their job. And I think collectively we formed a really good both coaching and management team. And that's allowed us to kind of, have fairly good success over the course of 9 years.
Well, I mean, we'll talk about success and having that team success. I mean, you've mentioned you've had that group around for, 8 of the last 9 years, but you're on a personal level and on a team level, you have a streak going on right now where you've never missed a postseason. Now, is that something you think about going into every year, or obviously it's just something that people bring up to you along the way?
Well, I think you'd be lying if you said you don't think about it. The reason we play this game is to get into playoffs and try to win a championship. And you can't win the championship without getting in. And it sometimes sounds like an easy task when there's only 18 teams and 2 miss, but we all know it's not that simple. Last year was a challenge for us to get in. We hit some rough waters down the stretch. We've also been on the other end where you were in easily. So I think each season is a different journey that you kind of learn to, as you get a little bit older, to take it as it comes. And for us, I think the minimum goal is always to make the playoffs. And that's the competitive barometer that we measure ourselves by.
For sure. And obviously, like you mentioned, you play to get into the playoffs. I mean, that's everyone's goal. So if you make it 9 years in a row, I guess it's something you don't even need to talk about. You just show up and play. Now, I mentioned off the get-go that we don't usually get coaches or GMs during our interview, so I do have some specific questions. Now, in your case, you have both functions, so I'm curious to know, what are some of the biggest challenges you get from being a GM or being a coach or vice versa? Do you sort of have to draw the line somewhere, or are you the same guy every day?
No, I think you have to. There's a different points of the day when you have to be a coach, and different points in the day that you have to do the GM. And I always explain that the coach, we look after the short term, which is the day to day. Whereas the manager, it's more the big picture. You're looking at a multi-year plan. Where's their draft picks for the next 4 years or 3 years, or what's their roster look like down the road, and what's their projection. And I think the most important thing is the scouting. The one area that can drop, and you have both roles if you're not careful, is the coverage, because it's a challenge to cover all of our geography in our league. It's unique that way. So we divide it up. We've got some veteran guys in Quebec that do a wonderful job. We have guys down here. So we talk a lot, and we value a lot of different people's input. And I think, again, part of what I love is that it's not just me. It's a team down here that does things collectively. Any of the trades, we talk through a lot of different things. We try to take our time and challenge each other. And I think you have to have people around you that are comfortable to challenge your area of thought, because it can't be all of us thinking the same way, or that won't work.
For sure. And I guess you, on a personal level, like when it comes to decision making, it must have like a weird effect on you where like sometimes you're standing behind the bench saying, hey, maybe we have a shot this year. And then you're up in the office and you're saying, hey, maybe I should start dealing these players and all that. And especially, I'm guessing the transactions must be that hard when you sort of got to give up on some guys to make your team better for a few years down the road.
Yeah, quite simply, it's easy when you're going for it. When you're injecting hope into your room, it's easy because everyone is energized by it. The difficult part wearing both roles is when you sell off, you trade off, and you're taking veteran players out of your dressing room, and you're essentially pulling hope out because you're telling your core group of guys that essentially you don't believe they can win a championship. And that's difficult when you have to walk in and still coach that group. So that is one of the challenging aspects of the job, but it's a job that has far more pluses than minuses.
What would you say has been your toughest decision so far in year 9?
Well, there's been a couple of the rebuild situations. When you coach and GM, as a coach, you have no choice but to be close to your players. So there's been some really difficult trades. Trading Pierre-Olivier Joseph was one of the most difficult. A guy had been a wonderful story for us, was our captain, was one of the best people, is one of the best people I've ever had the pleasure to be around.
Yeah.
Keith Getson was another guy that was a kind of a guy that forged his franchise through some difficult seasons and leadership, and an unsung hero. And his was those two situations were a little bit easier. We got to move them to contenders a little bit closer to home, but it's never easy to trade anybody, but let alone someone that you've spent 3 and 4 years with in the trenches night in, night out. So those are some challenging days.
Definitely. I bet I wouldn't want to be in your shoes on those days. That's for sure. Another thing that comes with longevity and being around the league for so much is that you've got to witness some of the changes. Obviously, I think the last decade has been one that we've seen the most changes in the game. Now, what can you say about the evolution of the QMJHL? What are some of the things that stand out from today that are different from your year 1 in our league?
Well, the most obvious answer is the Memorial Cup dominance of late, and I think that speaks volumes to the league. Years ago, prior to coming here, I spent time in the Ontario Hockey League, and the Key was always viewed as a little bit of a weak sister nationally because of mainly the record at the Memorial Cup. But since I've been here, we've had terrific teams that walk out of this league. It's a real challenge at the top end of this league. There's 4 or 5 teams every year that are built really well, play really well, coached really well. I think the quality of coaching is second to none in this league, and I think it's just getting better and better with each passing year. You see some of the names coming back from pro that are jumping right in and making immediate impacts in the lineup. So there's no easy nights anymore. And there used to be sometimes when teams would be out of the playoffs early and there were some easy nights, but that's not the case. Even now, the 8, the 9 teams that are fighting for playoffs, they're extremely well coached. Everybody uses video extremely well. There's no surprises, so you have to be on top of your game at all times.
Now, you brought up 2 interesting things earlier. You said one of the biggest challenges is scouting. Do you feel your scouting is different a little bit nowadays than it used to be? Are you looking more for, the smaller players to get a better shot? Are you focusing more on speed, on, skills? I mean, obviously the game has changed so much. Are you looking at things differently?
Yeah, most definitely. I think we're always challenging ourselves on the scouting side is that how do we stay current and what's the trends of the game? And I think size is always going to be in vogue. I think the smaller player can survive now. I think you have to balance it. We have an exciting young player here named Matthew Butler, who is really small in stature but can play the game. He might not have been able to play 15, 20 years ago, but he can in today's game. Yet you still need big bodies come playoff time. So when you put that puzzle together, I think you have to have the same. The biggest change is that you have to be able to skate. It's simply a game that you can't survive anymore as a mediocre skater. You have to be pretty much an elite level skater. So that becomes one of the biggest criteria in our scouting department.
And obviously, just when you mentioned that, one name that just I thought of right now is Lucas Cormier. Obviously, small stature defenseman. He was unreal skater as well. So that's the perfect example to loop in here. But one of the other things you brought up that sort of caught my ear here is the video aspect. I'm sure that's changed as well. But you're mentioning about how big the territories are. You got to coach your own team, you got to scout and everything. So on a personal level, how much time does Jim Hulton spend in front of a screen in a week's time?
Not a lot early in the season. I like to get out to some of the early tournaments here. We're fortunate here in the East Coast. We have the Monctonian in November, which is kind of the kickoff to the season. We have the Halifax Ice Jam in January. We split it up. Guy, who I mentioned earlier, Guy Girard, he does some scouting as well. So he usually goes to the Christmas tournaments in Quebec. And then we all try to make sure that we're at the Combine in Blainville. But one of the positives to come out of COVID, I think, is the increased use of video for scouting. And it's really helped our staff, in particular for our crossovers, because our Quebec area guys can now watch some of the Maritime list and vice versa. I think geography tells us the majority of our players are going to be in the Quebec region. So for me personally, it's nice to be able to take our scouting list and then do a little bit deeper dive on video. So when we get into discussions closer to the draft, there's more familiarity with a lot of the names.
And what about like on your, like in game prep and all that? I mean, are you a big video guy where you show guys sequences every day, or are you studying your opponents a lot on video and all that? Or are you more of a, show me real life type of guy, should I say?
No, we use a lot of video. I think today's kids are all visual learners. We think I have my own kids that are 19 and 16, and they're constantly on their phones, and they're learning through YouTube and a lot of different video aspects to today's world. So we try to incorporate it in, and we use it both individually and as a group. And I think our challenge is not to overdo it. It's to keep in mind attention spans, how much people can absorb. I think we try to learn from different educators those trends. It's more, I think, in the summer now you're learning more about just things like that rather than X and O's of hockey. It's how do kids learn now? How do we present better? What can we do with the technology and make it better? But we're definitely a visual world, and we use it a lot here.
Do you feel your role has sort of changed as a coach in today's hockey and the way you have to sort of build these personal relations with your players and all that? You're not seen as like the bench boss, put it that way?
Most definitely. This is a partnership now. There still has to be someone that makes the final decision, but I think you have to take the input of a lot of people, and you have to take the input of your players. And that wasn't the case 15, 20 years ago. It was much more of a dictatorship. It's not now. These kids will go through a wall. We hear a lot of it this generation, but they're willing to do whatever it takes to win. I think you just have to explain and approach it a little bit differently than maybe we did in years past. And a lot of our job is to answer why. And I think the other thing is to recognize that it's okay to have individual goals and individual dreams, because there's 23, 24 individuals that make up a team. So for instance, this year we have 24 players. So in our mind, we have 25 plans. We have one team plan, and then we have 24 individual plans. And if you balance both, and I think players respect and understand that, then they're willing to do whatever it takes for the good of the team, as long as they recognize that individually they're improving and getting a chance to reach their goals.
Now, through the years, you've sort of built that reputation as having a strong defense. I mean, you're sort of a defense first coach. Now, when you hear that, is that something you take pride in, or do you get offended of people saying like that you're mostly focused on defense?
No, I take pride in it because I'm still perhaps it's my vintage, but I'm still a believer that come crunch time, defense is going to win championships. You still have to be able to win a 2-1 game, and I think we see it every year at every level. It comes down to, can you check? Can you play away from the puck? Most of our skill set comes in our scouting is offensive. If you think about it, we're looking for skaters, we're looking for puck skill guys, because I think you can teach the defensive aspect. I think it's harder to teach the offensive part of the game because a lot of that is God-given ability. And there again, I think you try to pick that out in your scouting. But from a coaching perspective, I enjoy the challenges of teaching kids to play away from the puck, because I think the benefits are extremely important come playoff time.
For sure. Now, I'm curious to know, like through the vines, have you ever heard guys say they don't want to play in Charlottetown because they don't want to play a system, or they don't want to play defensively the way you want to play the game, or is that?
No, I don't think so, because I really don't think I'm doing anything much different than a lot of guys. I think most coaches you talk to still demand that their team plays the right way. We might play a little bit more of a low risk game than some people, because everybody's got a different philosophy. But I think kids come down here and they realize that it's not as strict as it maybe appears sometimes from the outside. As long as you're within the system, there's still some creativity that's allowed.
For sure. And talking about defense, I mean, I can bring up names like Matthew Welsh, Colton Ellis, Frankie LaPena recently. I mean, we've heard through the years or through history with the NHL that, some of the best coaches always had great goaltenders, or great goaltenders played for great coaches. So there's a different way of seeing that. But do you feel like you've been blessed with great goaltenders over the years?
Oh, without a doubt. When I was a young coach, I was at a hockey clinic a long time ago. I think it was Hockey Canada. And they went through a number of different systems. And then at the very end, the guy said, but the most important thing to remember in coaching is the GAG rule. And he put up an acronym of GAGG, and the whole room's kind of looking. He said, yeah, get a great goalie. And he's 100% right. You never kid yourself that I said off the top, the good players make good coaches. Well, great goalies make good coaches. And we've been really, really lucky. We've had a legacy of great goaltending dating back even prior to me getting here. When I first got here, I inherited Mason McDonald, who was an NHL draft pick, world junior goalie, who transitioned right into Matty Welsh, who was pretty much a franchise icon here. And then 2 outstanding performances last year with Frankie LaPena and then Jacob Robillard in the second half. So we're hoping that it continues with this year's crop and carries on, because a big part of winning in hockey in every era has always been goaltending.
Definitely. And another big part of winning is also, we mentioned it earlier with some of the people that surround you, but you also spoke about Hockey Canada there, which brought up the name of Kevin Elliott, who's your former trainer, who was also great at his job. I mean, I know Spider McNeil has one of the best reputations across the league for his job and all that. So do you take pride into hearing about those guys' reputation and surrounding yourself with them, obviously?
Well, absolutely, because they make you better by being around them. And when I first got here, to be able to walk in and not have to worry about anything away from just coaching. At the time Kevin was here, I'd known Kevin through past travels and knew that he was second to none in terms of not just injury, but Kevin did everything. Kevin booked travel, hotels. He knew everybody in the league. In spite of the same way, they've been here since day one. So for me, coming in as a new guy, new to the league, English only, they paved the way for me, and they're terrific people, and I think that really laid the foundation for the importance and underlying the importance of good people make up good teams, and two really, really close friends who are the best of what they do. And it's nice to see that Kevin's gone on to wonderful success with Hockey Canada, and Spider has a lot of opportunities ahead of him. We're pretty proud of the fact that he stays here.
And obviously for people listening online, I mean, I'm sure by now they can tell you're a very humble guy, but I mean, those guys and that whole staff is the reason behind some of the personal accolades that you get as well. I've heard you say that you take pride in your job as well, but obviously you've won 2-time coach of the year. You were GM of the year. You were the CHL coach of the year. I mean, there's a lot of that goes with the people that surround you as well, I guess.
Well, most importantly, as they said right off the hop, these are, they come across as me awards, but they're we awards. And you don't win those awards on your own. You only win them. You're the lucky recipient of a lot of work done by a lot of people behind the scenes. Our scouting staff, as I said earlier, we've been together for a long time. We have some great debates. We have a lot of laughs when we're not working. We challenge each other really hard when we are working. Same thing with our coaching staff. We try not to take ourselves too seriously away from the rink in terms of we like to have fun and we like to keep things light, but we work really hard at our job. And I think we challenge each other in healthy, positive ways, and it's paid off.
For sure. And obviously that whole team ambiance shows away from the ice as well with the guys, how the players are close to them. And that brings me into my next question with some of the alumni you guys have. Now, are there some players that have moved on, say, to the pros? I mean, you have a lot of names that can come up. We can talk about P.O. Joseph you brought earlier. There's Sprong. There's Alexandrov that comes to mind. I mean, are you still in touch with them? Do you talk to them? Do you watch their games? How is that relationship with some of the alumni that have come and gone?
Yeah, we do. With my time here in Charlottetown, there's been a tight bond. We've had an alumni association started. Unfortunately, with COVID, that got derailed a little bit. But the communication that we have in today's world with texting and everything at your fingertips allows us to keep in touch. P.O. didn't get back this summer, but he's normally back here. I know they were all in attendance at Keith Getson's wedding, which makes you smile when you hear about them all getting together. Daniel touches base on a regular basis. Nikita spent the summer here. We had a number of our alumni that worked out at our training camp. We had guest coaches. Nikita was one. Zach Beauregard lives here now after he got done his career. Ross Johnson, who's gone on to bigger things with the New York Islanders. We had them out as guest coaches, and we're fortunate a lot of the guys come back and still skate with us, guys like Ryan Graves and Ryan McKinnon. They've helped out with their leadership, and I think the more you can have your alumni involved, the greater the feel is that it's a family atmosphere.
Yeah, and it's funny because basically every name you bring up sort of ties into that. They're also great players, but they're also great kids. I mean, most of the names that you've brought up, they all have a great reputation. They're all super generous with their time and all that, and they've put fans first pretty much their whole careers. So that's fun to see that they're all tied to the Islanders program. So you guys are definitely doing something right there.
Well, I appreciate it. And again, I think it's a byproduct of doing a lot of homework to get good people. And we're not the only team in this league that's looking for that. Everybody is. We've just been fortunate that the teams have been bonded together. A lot of it's been great leadership. A lot of those guys that we mentioned were former captains or assistant captains. And a lot of the credit for the experiences and the good feelings that teams have is by your leadership core.
For sure. Now I see the time flying by here. We just have a few minutes left, and I'd hate myself to let you go because I have two of your past experience that I really wanted to bring up. One was the fact that also you've coached in the NHL as an assistant coach, with the Florida Panthers. Now, just to briefly cover that, I mean, is there one memory that comes to mind thinking about those days, or what was your welcome to the NHL moment?
Well, there's a few different memories. The welcome to the NHL moment, I think, was our first regular season game was in Carolina. And both myself and Pete DeBoer were coming right out of junior hockey into the NHL. And the game was so bloody fast at ice level. In the first period, we're walking off the ice. And I remember Pete saying, what did you think of that period? And I said, quite honestly, I couldn't tell you a thing. And he started laughing. He said, okay, good. I'm the same way. Because it just happened so fast. And trying to process it compared to coming right out of junior where things are obviously a step slower. So that was an introduction to kind of a wow moment. Like, okay, this really is the best league in the world. And I know you and I were talking off air, but we played an afternoon game in Montreal. A couple of memories are more in losses. Montreal come back and won in overtime, but the noise of the Bell Center was deafening. You couldn't hear yourself think. And then we had a couple of memorable games in the old Igloo in Pittsburgh as well. We beat them 6-5 one night in overtime, and I think it was one of Sid's only fights. He fought a guy named Brett McLean. Brett's now coaching in the American League, so it was fun to be a part of that, and just a lot of really good people that you meet along the way.
And the name Sid you brought up is a good transition to my next question, because you were also coach at the World Juniors. So you were there in 2004 and 2005, I believe, which was the powerhouse year. So you got to coach Sid in that second year. But for those of the people watching online who don't remember, 2004 is the we'll call it the butt fumble from Fleury.
Yeah.
So obviously that was a heartbreaking loss in the final. So you go from silver to winning gold the next year with that stacked team. I guess that was a rewarding feeling for both the team and yourself. I think you had 10 or 12 returnees on that team.
Yeah, most definitely. We had 11 guys back from the heartbreak, okay. And I think in 2004 we were a bit of a Cinderella story. We didn't. You've been with Hockey Canada, and you understand the importance. We hear all the time the importance of hitting adversity early in a tournament to learn from it, and we didn't in that tournament. We had an absolute ripple-free ride until the third period of the gold medal game, and we had a lead going into the third period. And quite frankly, we just ran out of time. I think that group would have adjusted, but I think we probably needed to hit some adversity at a time, and we had some historic bad luck, quite frankly, if you look at a couple of those plays. But the group learned from it in the next season. There was no novelty to it at all. I thought Brent Sutter came in, and Brent's a no-nonsense guy, and he kind of set the template right off the hop in the summer camp. And, we talk about Sid, but the biggest probably impact on our team was Patrice Bergeron. We got fortunate that it was NHL lockout. When Bergie came back, he was the epitome of the leader that we all witnessed in the NHL, and a terrific career just wrapping up. But to have him as your leader allowed everyone just to kind of fall into place. And there was no question who the leader was. One of the challenges with a talented group like that would be who is the actual leader, because so many of them are natural leaders. But I think because of Bergie's stature and status coming back from the NHL, that took care of that right off the hop. And that was a quietly really important part of that group.
Yeah, sets the tone type of thing.
Absolutely.
Now, I'm sure you have some fond memories from those two tournaments as well, but I mean, being an assistant coach, sometimes your role is being closer to the players, less about the X and O's and all that. So were you more of a player coach during that time? And was that like a different experience for you? Like you said, that most of those guys were already high NHL draft picks and they were so skilled. How was your relationship with them?
I was a good cop, which was a strange role for me to be able to play, which was actually kind of enjoyable. And I've been really fortunate to be with the 1985 birth group. Which was the most prominent guys in that, the Mike Richards, the Dion Phaneufs, the Braden Colburns of the world. We'd been together 3 years in a row because I had the good fortune to coach them in the Ivan Halinka tournament. We won a gold medal at the under 18 level, led primarily by that group of kids. And then a majority of them were at both World Juniors. So we became pretty tight over the course of 3 years. And we still run into different peoples. In fact, I heard the name Stephen Dixon, a name from that team, was in town most recently. And the bond, it's the old adage, when you win together, you walk together forever. And no matter where you bump into these guys, and it could be 20 years, it could be longer, the bond is still there. And it's a neat thing that we'll always have.
For sure. Now, obviously, I have so many more questions I wanted to get through, but this is all the time we had. So whether I'll call you Jim, Bowie, Bucky, or whatever, thanks for taking the time for doing this. Obviously, a coach's schedule is pretty tight, but you taking the time is very appreciated. And I know the people online watching are very appreciative as well.
Well, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you. It's always fun to chat hockey.
Awesome. Well, thanks, and we'll wish you the best for the rest of the season, and hopefully you get the playoff streak going.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.